I didn't say a word. I just watched him walk back out to the driveway like nothing had happened, wiping his hands on his jeans, checking his phone. That's when I knew. My name is Gerald. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer for the county, raised my son in a house I built additions onto with my own hands, and buried my wife Patricia on a Tuesday morning in October 3 years ago, with 42 people standing in the rain, because she was the kind of woman people drove hours to say goodbye to. I am not a dramatic man. I do not exaggerate. What I am about to tell you happened exactly as I describe it. My son's name is Derek. He's 42. He works in finance, makes good money, drives a car that costs more than I paid for my first house. His wife's name is Melanie. I have tried, for 11 years, to find something genuine to say about Melanie. The most honest thing I can tell you is that she has very straight teeth, and she never forgets a slight. They have a daughter. Her name is Emma. She's 6 years old, and she is the reason I did not walk away from all of this a long time ago. Emma has Patricia's eyes, that particular shade of gray-green that looks different depending on the light, and she still reaches up for my hand when we walk anywhere together. And that single gesture has kept me softer than I probably should have stayed. 3 weeks before everything came to a head, Derek called me on a Sunday evening. He said he was worried about me. He said the neighbors had mentioned I seemed confused lately, that I'd been leaving lights on, that I'd parked the truck at an odd angle twice in a row. I told him I parked the truck the way I always parked the truck. He said he wasn't trying to upset me. He was just concerned. His voice had that particular careful quality it gets when he's reading from something he prepared. I let it go. I shouldn't have, but I did. 2 weeks after that, he asked if he could bring Emma over on a Saturday so she could spend the day with me. I said, of course. I said I'd make her the blueberry pancakes she always asked for, and we'd go out back and check on the garden. He said that sounded great. He said Melanie might stop by later in the afternoon to pick Emma up. I said fine. Emma arrived at 9 in the morning, bouncing on her heels on my front porch with paint on her sneakers and a stuffed rabbit under her arm that she'd named Gerald, which she found enormously funny. We made the pancakes. We checked the tomatoes. We sat on the back porch, and she told me about a boy at school named Marcus who had eaten a crayon on purpose, and I told her about the time her father had swallowed a marble at age 4, and we'd had to wait 3 days for confirmation that it had passed through, and she laughed so hard she snorted, which made her laugh harder. That was a good morning. I want to be clear about that. That morning was exactly what I needed it to be. Melanie arrived around 2. She was pleasant in the particular way she gets when she wants something eye contact a beat longer than usual. Compliments that land just slightly sideways, like she's reading the room while appearing not to. She said the house looked wonderful. She said I seemed rested. She asked, very casually, if Derek had mentioned anything about updating some of the estate paperwork, because the attorney had apparently flagged something minor that just needed a signature. I said I hadn't heard about it. She said, oh, he probably just forgot to mention it. No rush at all. She'd have him call me. After they left, I walked back into my study, the room that used to be Patricia's reading room, that I'd slowly converted into a workspace after she passed. The room with her old armchair still in the corner because I wasn't ready to move it, and I sat down at my desk. That's when I saw it. It was small, matte black, about the size of a thick pen cap, tucked against the back inside corner of the top drawer, held in place with a strip of adhesive. If I hadn't pulled the drawer all the way out to get a fresh legal pad, I would have missed it entirely. I didn't touch it. I sat very still for a moment, the way you sit when you've just registered something your brain hasn't finished processing. Then I picked up the legal pad, closed the drawer, and went and made myself a cup of coffee. I am not a man who panics. I am a man who was trained to look at a failing load-bearing wall and calculate, before reacting, exactly what it would take to keep the structure from coming down. I applied that same approach now. I knew what it was. I'd read enough, seen enough news over the past few years, to recognize a small audio recording device when I was looking at one. The question was not what it was. The question was why it was there, and what, exactly, they were hoping to capture. The word Patricia used to use for Derek, when he was a teenager and she was trying to be fair about his flaws, was calculating. She said it like it wasn't entirely a bad thing, because she was always trying to find the version of him that wasn't. But she knew. She knew before I was willing to admit it, that our son had a way of arranging situations in advance, of setting up outcomes he'd already decided on, and then performing surprise when they arrived. I thought about the phone call 3 weeks ago. I thought about the neighbors apparently commenting on my behavior. I thought about the attorney flagging something minor that just needed a signature. I thought about the will. Patricia and I had drafted it together 8 years before she died. The house. The savings. A modest investment account split between Derek and the small charitable foundation Patricia had been involved with since the 90s. Standard. Clean. Witnessed and filed, and absolutely not in need of updating, unless someone wanted to change the terms. I sat with my coffee, and I thought about my granddaughter and her gray-green eyes, and I thought about what it would mean if someone had decided that a 67-year-old man living alone in his house was a problem to be managed rather than a father to be loved. I made 2 phone calls that evening. The first was to my doctor, Helen Marsh, who I had been seeing for 16 years and who had delivered the news of Patricia's diagnosis with such careful honesty that I had trusted her completely ever since. I told her what I'd found. I told her about Derek's phone call, about the neighbors, about Melanie's comment regarding paperwork and attorneys. Helen listened without interrupting, which is one of her best qualities. Then she told me to come in Monday morning for a full cognitive evaluation and said she would document everything. She said the phrase, establishing a medical record, in a tone that let me know she understood exactly what I was describing. The second call was to a man named Ray Caulfield, who had been my closest friend for 34 years, who had been best man at my wedding, and who had retired 4 years earlier from 22 years as a county investigator. Ray listened to the whole thing, asked 3 questions, and then said, "Don't move it. Don't let them know you found it. And call an attorney first thing tomorrow morning." I asked him which attorney. He gave me a name. I followed both pieces of advice to the letter. The attorney's name was Sandra Okafor. Her office was 40 minutes from my house, in a part of town I rarely had reason to visit, which suited me fine. I met with her on Monday afternoon after my appointment with Helen. She was sharp and unhurried, which is a combination I have always respected in people. She looked at the photographs I'd taken of the device in the drawer, read through the notes I'd typed up on my phone about the timeline of events, and then leaned back in her chair and said, "Tell me about the will." I told her about the will. She asked whether I had any reason to believe Derek had seen a copy. I said that Patricia and I had never shared the specific terms with him, but that he knew he was a beneficiary, and that the foundation was also named, and that the split was not entirely in his favor. She nodded slowly and said, "And what is the approximate value of the estate?" I told her. She nodded again and said, "Mr. Gerald, what you're describing, if it is what it appears to be, is an attempt to establish grounds for a competency challenge. The recording device is almost certainly there to capture anything that could be presented as confused speech, disorientation, or impaired judgment. Combined with manufactured witness accounts from neighbors, it creates a paper trail that could support a petition to have you declared legally incapacitated." She said it very calmly. I appreciated that. I asked her what my options were. She told me. We talked for 1 hour and 20 minutes. When I left her office, I had a plan. The first part of the plan was the hardest, because it required me to behave exactly as I normally would for the next several days, while knowing what I knew. To answer Derek's texts warmly, to mention Emma's visit in casual terms, to say nothing about the drawer, about Helen, about Sandra Okafor. I am not, by nature, a deceptive person. But I kept thinking about something my father used to say when I was young, when the neighbor's kid would come over looking for trouble. Don't run from a bully, and don't fight one in his own yard. Make him fight in yours. I had spent my entire career understanding structures, understanding what holds things up and what brings them down. I understood now that the structure Derek had been quietly building around me was designed to look solid from the outside while hollowing me out from within. And the only way to bring it down safely, without collateral damage, without hurting Emma, was to let it stand long enough for me to see all the load-bearing points. On Wednesday evening, I moved the device. I did not take it out of the house. I moved it from the desk drawer to the bookshelf in the living room. The shelves that hold Patricia's old books, the photograph albums, the ceramic cardinal Emma had made me at school last year. I positioned it where the microphone would capture the full room clearly. The couch, the armchair, the coffee table where guests sat when they visited. Then I waited. Derek called on Thursday. He said he'd been thinking about what Melanie had mentioned, about the estate paperwork, and asked if he could come by Saturday to go over some things. I said that would be fine. I said I'd have coffee on. He said great. His voice had that careful, prepared quality again. I noticed it the way you notice a crack in a foundation wall that's been painted over not because it's obvious, but because you know what to look for. Saturday morning, Emma did not come this time. That told me something. Derek arrived at 10:15 with Melanie and a man I didn't recognize who was introduced as a friend who happened to be in the area. The friend had the particular polished informality of someone who is professionally polished, and he carried a slim leather folder. And his name, apparently, was Jeff. I shook his hand and offered everyone coffee. We sat in the living room. Melanie commented on the ceramic cardinal on the bookshelf. I said Emma had made it. She smiled. Derek explained, in the careful language of someone who had rehearsed this, that he'd been consulting with Jeff, who had some background in estate planning, just as a courtesy, just to make sure everything was current and protected. He said the attorney who had originally handled Patricia's and my will had apparently retired, which was true. He said that left some documentation in a gray area, which was not true. He said it might make sense, just for everyone's peace of mind, to have a fresh set of documents prepared. He slid a folder across the coffee table toward me. I picked it up. I opened it. I read the first page slowly, the way I always read anything with a signature line, which is the way Sandra Okafor had specifically told me to continue doing in front of witnesses. The documents were not a simple update. They transferred management of the estate to Derek upon a finding of incapacity. They included a clause that defined incapacity in terms broad enough to be applied based on a physician's note, a neighbor's sworn statement, or a formal petition. The foundation Patricia had cared about was not mentioned anywhere. I set the folder back on the table. I said I appreciated him thinking about this, but that I had recently met with my own attorney and was comfortable with my existing arrangements. Derek said he understood. But had I really had a chance to look things over carefully? Because there was also the question of what happens if something unexpected. I said I had looked things over carefully. Melanie said, gently, that they were only trying to make sure I was protected, that living alone could be isolating, that a few of my neighbors had apparently expressed some concern. I looked at her. I said I wasn't aware of any concerns my neighbors had, and that I'd had coffee with the Hendersons across the street just last week and they hadn't mentioned anything. There was a small silence. Jeff said perhaps they should schedule a follow-up at a time when I'd had more of a chance to review. I said there was no need. I said I was satisfied with my current arrangements. I said it clearly and with no tremor in my voice, because I had been waiting to say it, because I had been saving up the steadiness for this exact moment. They left 40 minutes later. Melanie hugged me at the door in the way she sometimes does, a performance of warmth assembled from pieces of actual warmth, and said they'd talk soon. Derek said he loved me. I said I loved him too, and I meant it. And that is the thing that made all of this so much harder than anger would have been. Because you cannot be angry the way you need to be angry at someone you also love. You can only be sad and clear-eyed and determined, and you can only hope that what you're doing protects you both, protects you from what they're becoming, and protects them, eventually, from what they nearly did. Sandra had told me that the moment they presented the documents, we had what we needed. She had also told me that if the device in my home captured anything useful, it needed to be handled correctly or it couldn't be used. What it could do, combined with everything else, the medical evaluation, the documented witness statements we'd quietly gathered from my actual neighbors, who were quite startled to learn their names were being invoked, was establish a pattern of behavior consistent with undue influence and attempted fraud. Ray had helped me understand the rest. His contacts were still current. The right conversations had been had with the right people, quietly, over the previous week. I sat in the living room after they drove away, and I looked at Patricia's books on the shelf, and I thought about the last real conversation I had with her. 2 days before she slipped into the sleep she didn't come back from. She'd been worried about Derek. Not in a way she'd fully articulated, just in that way she had of mentioning things sideways, of saying she hoped he'd find his footing, of saying she hoped he knew that the things we leave behind us are only worth something if the people we leave them to are worth something themselves. I think she knew. I think she was trying to prepare me. I was not fully prepared, but I was not unprepared. The following Wednesday, Derek received a certified letter from Sandra Okafor's office, outlining the full legal context of the documents he'd presented, the circumstances under which the recording device had been discovered, and the nature of the statements Sandra had received from the Hendersons, from Dr. Marsh, from two other neighbors whose names I will not use here out of respect for their privacy. The letter was not a threat. It was documentation. It was a complete and orderly account of what had happened, and what it constituted, and what the appropriate next steps would be if the behavior continued. It also included a note that the existing will had been reviewed, updated for clarity, and refiled with a new attorney, and that the foundation Patricia had cared about had been made co-executor alongside a trusted third party, who was Ray, who had agreed to take on the role without hesitation. I did not hear from Derek for 11 days. When he finally called, he did not apologize. He said things like, "I was trying to do what I thought was right, and Melanie was concerned, and I should have talked to you directly." I listened. I did not fill the silences for him. I let him sit in them. I said I was glad he called. I said I wanted to continue having a relationship with him, and more importantly, with Emma. I said I needed him to understand that what he had done, what they had done together, was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice, and choices have weight, and the weight of this one would be between us for a long time. He said he understood. I don't know if he did. I hope he did. Emma came over the following Saturday. She brought Gerald, the stuffed rabbit. She'd drawn a small hat on him with marker, which she was very proud of. We made pancakes again. We went out back, and the tomatoes had finally started to turn red, and she asked if we could pick them, and I said yes, and we filled a colander together, and she carried it back to the kitchen with the particular careful seriousness of a child who has been trusted with something important. I watched her walk ahead of me down the path, in her sneakers with the paint on them, holding that colander with both hands, and something in my chest that had been tight for months finally, quietly, let go. I am not a man who talks about feelings easily. Patricia used to say that getting me to name an emotion was like trying to get a cat to come when called theoretically possible but requiring more patience than was often practical. But I will say this, plainly, because you deserve a plain ending. I am 67 years old. I have lost the woman I loved most in my life. I have discovered that my only son looked at what I had built and saw a problem to be solved rather than a life to be respected. I have had to do things I never imagined doing to protect myself from someone I changed diapers for, helped with algebra homework, drove to baseball practice for 11 years, and I am still here. I am still the man who makes blueberry pancakes on Saturday morning. I am still the man Patricia married. I am still the man who checks the tomatoes and tells stories about marbles and laughs until it feels like the house is warmer. They did not take that. They tried, and they failed, and the structure held. That evening, after Emma went home, I poured 2 fingers of the good bourbon I keep for significant occasions, sat in Patricia's old armchair, and looked at the ceramic cardinal on the bookshelf for a long time. Then I raised the glass, very slightly, in the direction of her books. I said, I handled it, and I could have sworn, in the way that grieving people sometimes allow themselves to believe in the things they cannot prove, that the room felt like she'd heard me.